The Iranian F-14. What is the history behind these already rich in history aircraft? Hello guys, once again it's Matt. Thank you all the members and patrons. Make sure to subscribe, and of course we are going to have the event F-14A for the Iranians, and I really wanted to make a little bit of a new type of video that I think I did at the very early stages of the channel, but I really wanted to talk about the history of the aircraft. Of course, the Tomcats itself, it's not really, I don't need to explain the Tomcats history behind it. Everybody knows the F-14, but I really wanted to dive into the Iranian Air Force F-14s because they are very, very interesting, and one of the most, like, the weirdest histories or stories behind an aircraft. So let's just dive right into it, okay? Attempts were made to sell the Tomcat for other nations, guys, like Canada, Germany, etc. But ultimately, the only nation out of all nations that used the F-14 outside the US was the Iranians. In the early 70s, the Imperial Iranian Air Force was actually looking for an advanced aircraft to be able to intercept reconnaissance MiG-25s. And other advanced Soviet jets. Remember, the Soviet Union had a border with Iran, right? And with the reign of the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, being aligned with the politics of the US, it would make sense, at a certain extent, of course, it would make sense that he would look for American-made jets. After a visit from the US President Nixon, of course, in 1972, Iran was presented with the F-14, and initiated the acquisition procedure. McDonnell Douglas was actually invited to present the F-15 as well, and the Tomcat and the Eagle went head-to-head for the Iranians, and basically they decided for the F-14. In 1974, the order for 30 F-14As happened together with missiles. Months later, the order actually got increased to more missiles and 80 F-14s, even with an airbase and infrastructure being built to support the Tomcats. The first F-14 actually arrived in January 1976, and the only mod compared to the American one was the different avionics, trading from classified ones, with training and more being delivered shortly afterwards. Not gonna get too much into it, of course, but in 1979, something big happened in Iran, and here is actually where the story becomes really interesting. The Shah was actually overthrown by the Islamic Revolution, right? And shortly after that, the interim government of Iran ceased most arms deals from the West. This created a big problem for both the US and the Iranians, since the US didn't want one of the most advanced aircraft they had at the time to fall into the enemy's hands, of course, or worse, right, into Soviets' hands, and the Iranians lost the support to maintain the aircraft flying and buying more stuff and modernizing them, right? Shortly afterwards, the F-14 actually proved its potential in the Iran-Iraq War. This was like 1 year after the revolution, and in 1980, the first air-to-air kill happened when an Iranian F-14 shot down an Mi-25 helicopter, a variant of the Hind helicopter. The war was a very, very long one, and it lasted until 1988, and basically they just, had the aircraft starting to get into service, and they were already draw into war, right? Initially, the F-14 was in this war used extensively as almost an AWACS platform, you know? It had the most powerful radar in an aircraft for the Iranians, obviously, and a far more advanced radar than the old, especially than the old MiG-21s and 23s that the Iraqis had, making a perfect weapon to be used to defend Tehran, of course, and any strategic place like Karg Islands or anything like that, and even able to face the mighty MiG-25. The new MiG-25 was actually being used as a reconnaissance aircraft and even as a bomber by the Iraqis, right? Making it a very hard aircraft to shoot down by the normal F-4s and F-5s that the Iranian had, proving the point that the F-14 was actually needed to defend Iran against foreign threats, right? Not too long after that, the F-14, between like 1982, something like that, the F-14 started to be used more and more in normal combat missions, right? Interceptions and cap missions, especially since most aircraft that the Iraqis had, as I was saying, were MiG-21s and 23s. The F-14 could maintain a good effective position with air superiority in the battlefield, especially with the usage of the AIM-54. Remember, with the revolution, the F-14 didn't get too many upgrades. It was shortly after the aircraft were delivered, right? So it didn't have any upgrades on the missile department. The main missile was the AIM-54A, but also using the AIM-9P and AIM-7Es. Yes, the AIM-7Es, although some sources claim that the AIM-7F was in some small numbers there as well. I couldn't confirm it, but in general it was AIM-7Es, AIM-9Ps, and AIM-54As. So it was extensively used in the war. It's hard to confirm, how effectively it was, in the battlefield, but basically it's hard to know how many aircraft the F-14 shot down and how many F-14s were shot down, since obviously the Iraqis and the Iranian sources are conflicting. The clear example of this is the F-14 versus MiG-25 numbers. The Iraqis actually claim that only one MiG-25 was shot down by an F-14, while the Iranians claim that 9 were shot down. So it's complicated. The Iraqis claim that more than 70 F-14s were shot down, but US estimates said that it was around 14 to 16. One by a MiG-25, one by a MiG-21, and some by other MiG-23s and Mirage F-1s, SAM sites, stuff like that, right? So it's conflicting to know how good the aircraft was actually, but at the end of the day, even with that, we can know that it was very effective. The F-14 apparently shot down a lot of aircraft, around 50 to 160. It's hard to know how, correct these estimates are, but at the end of the day, even in the lowest estimates possible, 50 aircraft would be a very good number, And there is an interesting part about the Iran-Iraq war too in the regards of defections. In 1986, 3 F-14s tried to defect to Iraq. 2 of them were actually successful, and one of them was actually shot down by the Iraqi Air Force by kind of a mistake, right? Another F-14 was delivered to the Soviet Union willingly by the Iranians in exchange for some technical assistance, and one of the crews of the aircraft was actually planning to defect, and it did defect to the Soviet Union as well. So it was a very, very important aircraft for the Iranians, but the Soviets actually managed to get one of them into their hands, right? At the end of the day, the fear that the US had actually became real. The only good part about it for the US is that it took a little bit of time, more than 10 years after the F-14s being in service, right? The F-14 continued to be one of the backbones of the Iranian Air Force after the war, and after the retirement of the F-14 in the US Navy, the US took several measures to make sure the Iranians could not get their hands in spare parts and weapon systems of the F-14s, going even to the extent of destroying most of the F-14s that they had to actually just prevent them to get these parts. But even with that, apparently it is reported that the Iranians got a massive amount of spare parts after that retirement, so it's a hidden war that we don't know much about, trying to buy and hide and have these parts between the Iranians and the US. The F-14 is still used in low numbers, and the cool part about these aircraft is that they actually try to, with some success, modernize and produce domestic parts for the aircraft, and weapon systems. So this would include, for example, the R-27 that we will see in the game, which is very, very interesting. Some sources claim that it wasn't really successful in the adaptation of the F-14, but some sources claim that it was okay, they just didn't like it very much. But at the end of the day, the funniest thing ever was that they actually tried to add a Hawk missile, a MIM-23, a ground-to-air, very, very large missile, for a loadout for it. It's very, very large. Eventually this became the Sigil, I think it's called, which is basically a modified Hawk to be used in the F-14. How many missiles they have and if they are being used, I don't know, but still it's pretty cool. And yeah, it's very hard to find information about these missiles, right? And the Fakor 90 that I talked a little bit about, that it's basically a very heavily domestically modified AIM-54 with different guidance systems and using the Hawk as a basis, right? So yeah, basically it is a very interesting aircraft already with an amazing story behind it. And it never ceases to provide us with some cool facts and weird happenings throughout the history, you know. And the F-14 is basically, and the Iranian Air Force for the F-14's history is the pinnacle of that. It's just weird and fun and crazy, you know. So yeah, basically this is a short version of the history behind the F-14 on Iranian soil. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments if you would like to see more stuff like this. See you guys on the next one, and bye.